J'invite le secrétaire.
Would now like to invite the Secretary General to read out the first point on the agenda.
We have a draft motion on the condemnation of corruption in Africa and requesting the African Union to set up an anti-corruption desk at the AU Secretariat. The role is to considering that corruption is one of the major causes of Africa's underdevelopment. Thank you.
J'invite l'honorable
To invite the Honorable Biji Butare to present this motion to the Chamber.
Thank you, Mr. President. How long do I have? 5 minutes? How long do I have?
Go ahead.
Okay.
It's just to present the motion.
Okay. I'm presenting this motion that calls upon this Honorable Parliament to condemn corruption in Africa and to request the African Union to set up an anti-corruption desk at the AU Secretariat. Reasons being that we all know that corruption is one of the major causes of our underdevelopment, and that if we are to catch up with the rest of the developing world, we have to deal with this monster. And it is for that reason that I also ask that we declare Africa a corruption-free zone from now till our Vision 2063. I think the motion is straightforward, Mr. President. I thank you.
Who supports this motion? Honorable Penyo Butare. Dr. Penyo Butare. He is not in the room? Is he not in the room?
He's not in the room, Your Excellency.
Madam. Y a-t-il quelqu'un?
Is there somebody else who is going to second this motion?
President, Domai Gatfan, South Sudan.
Please, can you introduce yourself?
Honorable Domai Gatfan from South Sudan.
Yes, you have a floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President, honorable members. In light of the above mentioned genuine points, I duly second.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. In accordance with the internal regulations of the African Union, the debate will take place now, and there will be 2 minutes per speaker. The first speaker will be Honorable Martin Nitereste from Burundi. You have the floor. Honorable Nitereste from Burundi doesn't appear to be in the room. The second on the list is the Honorable Kaltumo Abdel Karim Suleiman from Sudan. Third on the list is the Honorable Zarikat Diallo from Guinea. Thank you, Mr. President. We all know that corruption is a plague that afflicts most African countries, and it halts development for all our populations. And as such, no strategy or initiative is too much in order to stop corruption, this plague that is causing real economic development to stagnate on the continent. And this is why all these initiatives should be encouraged, and we support the motion. Thank you very much, dear colleague. And I would like to give the floor to Honorable Seko Fantomalo from Mali. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to congratulate the colleagues who drafted this motion. And it is a very welcome motion. And as we all know, today our continent is afflicted by corruption, and corruption even at a state level. And this creates instability and conflict because resources are not well enough distributed amongst the people. And therefore, if we are able to end corruption, we think that we will win at least 50% of the challenge to develop the continent. The floor is now to Honorable Sherala Abdullahi from Ethiopia.
Thank you, Ms. I pass.
Thank you. Je voudrais maintenant donner.
Now I'd like to give the floor to the Honorable Nwe Mgibaba from Burundi. Sorry. I'm now giving the floor to the Honorable Ahmad Tai Ahmed from Chad. Thank you, Mr. President. I also support the motion. However, I would like to make some amendments to the French text. In terms of the second paragraph, we need to add Pan-African Parliament to the second paragraph. I would like to give the floor to Honorable Ernest Sindile from Tanzania.
Je donne la parole à...
Now giving the floor to the Honorable David Alidou Samfo from Burkina Faso. I pass, thank you. I give the floor to the Honorable Mbone Mohammed from Tanzania.
Je donne la parole.
Give the floor to the Honorable Ake Kami Épouse Akun from Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, in my view, corruption is something that is really halting development on our continent. And I would like to know whether it is really possible to stop corruption in Africa, given that some Africans see corruption as a means to power and a way of controlling all situations. And the sanctions that are foreseen in the laws against corruption are not applied, whether it be the legal instruments or other instruments to stop corruption in our countries. As far as I'm concerned, corruption is a dream that we need to aspire to, and we need to make sure that this dream becomes reality. And I would like to share with you a quote from the writer Jacques Audiberti. He says that life is made up of illusions, and among these illusions, some become reality, and it's up to us as to which become the reality. Mr. President, it's with these words that I would like to close my speech, and I would like to support the motion for the fight against corruption and for the creation of this anti-corruption desk. Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to the Honorable Santos Bonita Kelia from South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President, and colleagues, good morning. I trust you had a wonderful weekend. Mr. President, we speak of poverty as one of the main key pillars that is affecting the growth of Africa. And the SDGs talk greatly about ways and means to eradicate poverty. But we will never get there if we allow funds to leave Africa, as the report presented by President Mbeki, former President Mbeki, with regard to the illicit flow of funds out of Africa, and until general corruption, especially in respect of awarding tenders and self-enrichment programs. The motion is very noble, Mr. President, and I have no hesitation in supporting such a motion. However, I think a lesson needs to be drawn from those countries that do have anti-corruption units to guide and see whether that model can be replicated at the AU so that we would be collectively as a continent able to not perhaps eradicate corruption completely, but at least slow it down and in some future, maybe 20 to 50 years, eradicate it completely. I think there needs to be stricter penalties as well. And if heads of state know that there are people who are committing corruption, especially in the state, they should be up for criminal charges. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor now to the Honourable Asha Abdullah Juma from Tanzania.
Elle n'est pas dans la chambre.
She's not in the chamber? Okay, then I give the floor to Honourable Bernadette Laye.
President. Mr. President, while agreeing to the motion as an important one, I want to draw the attention of this House, especially when it comes to the establishment of an anti-corruption table or desk in the African Union. I want to draw the attention of this House that one of the 10 organs of the African Union is the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption. We already have the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption. So maybe my suggestion would be, as one of the 10 organs, maybe in the next session, let us call this African Union Advisory Board to come and tell us exactly what is their work, what mechanisms have been put in place to curb corruption within the African Union institutions and organs, and also in the member states, and what documents exist, what share value documents exist in the operationalization of their work. I think we can, having had this presentation, we can be more informed for us to take further this motion, because maybe it already exists, but if it doesn't exist, we have a body that is looking after corruption in the African Union. Let us invite them here to make a presentation to us, let them present to us all the documents and everything. Then we are in a better position to really move our motion. I thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I would like to now invite the fourth Vice President to confirm that the African Union has an anti-corruption committee that is led by our brother from Ghana. And this committee produces annual reports that is presented during the meeting of the heads of state and government. And as our colleague has said, I think that we should ask this committee to make a presentation to us and to encourage this committee in its work. And given that this committee exists already, instead of creating a new desk, we can perhaps encourage and support the work of this committee. And if Africa is not moving forward, it is essentially because of corruption. Corruption at every level, whether it be in schools, in the marketplace, in the political arena. And this is why this motion is so important, and that's why it must be supported, and why it supports already the work that is currently done by the African Union. The debate is closed, and I would like to give the floor to the Honourable Boje to respond to the debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank my colleagues for supporting this motion, which I believe is straightforward. On the last intervention that the African Union has a committee already, that is commendable, but the function of a committee and the function of a desk are two entirely different things. In my mind, a desk would be sort of a secretariat that would be set up for the sole purpose of fighting corruption in Africa, encouraging good governance, and setting up of similar anti-corruption bodies in the various African states. Whilst an ad hoc committee is commendable, it doesn't go far enough. And I think you could have this committee functioning and the desk as well. It really wouldn't do any harm at all. But a desk would be is far-reaching in that it is a permanent setup that will have year plans and targets, and that will, have something tangible to report on. The mere fact that we have a committee, an ad hoc committee, like I said, is commendable. But an ad hoc committee really does not go far enough, Mr. President. And I therefore still stand by my motion that we pass a motion that the AU should set up such a desk. And I hope the matter will be put up to a vote. I thank you, Mr. President.
Yes.
President, it is not an ad hoc committee. The advisory board is not an ad hoc committee. It is created after the constitutive act of the African Union. It is a permanent committee, just like the Pan-African Parliament was created, just like the ECOSOC, just like the NEPAD. So we are not talking of an ad hoc committee that has its responsibilities starting from a point and ending. This is one of the institutionalized organs of the African Union. I agree with your motion, but what I want us to do is that since there's an African Union advisory board on corruption, my motion is, let us call them in this parliament. Let them make a presentation to us since their inception. What have they done? What modalities have they put in place? What documents exist? I think with that presentation, we will now move in a more informed position as to whether a DEX is necessary or as to whether a DEX does not even exist now. I know that most countries have an anti-corruption commission. They have an anti-corruption law. We have the ECOWAS protocol on corruption and everything. Your motion is a laudable one. But what I'm saying, within the African Union, we have an organ created just like PAP. Why not call this organ so that they will present to us their work, principles, modalities, and everything? Then we shall move a motion, if DEX does not exist, to put a DEX at the member state level, at the organs of the African Union, to ensure that our
point of way forward. Point of way forward.
Yes.
Yeah, I have to thank the mover of the motion. I have also to thank the fourth vice president of bringing to us that body within the AU.
Maybe I would like to propose that can we defer the motion up until those people who are responsible for that body of corruption come and present a paper to us, and from there, as she stated, we can now revisit the motion. Can we agree on that? I don't know.
Procedure, Mr. President.
Yes? Yeah? Honorable Faisal, you have the floor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أولا أشكر صاحب اللائحة. نحن نتحدث على تعاون الذي هو.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The fight against corruption and the setting up of a committee, with all due respect to the African Union, this has to represent member states. But the project is to create a specialized desk here within Parliament. It is the people who are concerned. The Parliament represents the people. So the motion is to create a specialized desk within PAP so that this desk can take over investigations and tasks related to the struggle against corruption. It is not only financial corruption, but it is also about conventions and international conventions. In Tunisia, in my country, for example, we have a tribunal for the fight against corruption. We have a committee within Parliament also to fight against corruption. But everything that has happened since the setting up of this committee needs to bear in mind that the truth has to come out, and that is why we need to have a committee within PAP. Thank you. The first Vice President has the floor.
Good morning, honourable members, and in particular to you, honourable Chairman of this Parliament. I asked to intervene for a question of procedure. The motion has been submitted, we have opened the debate, and we have given the floor to the proposer. It seems to me that all the conditions for the decision from this chamber was met. Now, what is happening, in my opinion, you are reopening the debate, and I don't think that this is the due procedure. And it doesn't seem to be correct. But if you want my opinion, dear colleagues, it seems to me that for all of us, it would be the most prudent path to, first of all, to have the debate on the issue on the condition of corruption in the continent. And as the Honourable Fourth Vice Chairman said, to call upon the responsible people that are paid for that to come and explain to us here. And then thereafter we should decide on the creation of other institutions or organs within the context of the African Union. So, Chairperson, I think that this motion is pertinent, and I'm talking out of my own knowledge. I was the general attorney in my country, and I know how much corruption costs to our people and all the inefficiencies on the fight against corruption. So I therefore suggest that we should postpone the final decision upon receiving the information from the African Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. I don't think I'm going to reopen the debate. This is a matter of people who want to express themselves through motions. I cannot anticipate that whatever the person is going to say is part of the debate. I am not making a decision on my own. If there are motions, we will consider all of them and see how relevant they are. The debate is now closed on this matter, and I should like to draw your attention to the fact that the African Convention on Corruption has already been signed by 37 countries. It is an organ of the African Union. It is not a committee. There is a president and an executive secretariat. Indeed, they meet to discuss corruption issues. So, as far as I'm concerned, let me give the floor to the author of the motion. No, the general debate is closed. You have the floor if it's a motion. Thank you. Do I have the floor, Mr. President?
You are right, Mr. President. When somebody tables a motion, it is for a particular purpose to highlight something. But I think we are out of procedure here. I've presented a motion. It's been debated. I think it should now go for a vote, whether this House adopts this motion or rejects it. If there is a counter motion that says no, let's not pass this motion. Instead, let's invite the AU to come and tell us about corruption here. It has to be a counter motion to the motion that I have presented. And the mere fact that we don't even know what the committee does and how far they have gone, it just shows that we are in need of this desk, Mr. President. And might I call that we follow the correct procedure? Either the executive, being yourself, the vice president and former vice president, should give a counter motion and say the executive counters this motion. We debate the counter motion, and if it passes, well and good. But let us finish the whole process. We can't just truncate this motion without asking the House to vote for it and without a counter motion. I'm not afraid of a counter motion from the executive, Mr. President, from yourself, the vice president and former vice president. But we can't just end it in mid-sentence without deciding on whether we adopt this motion or not. Let us follow the procedure, Mr. President, and let's put the matter to a vote or have the executive come with a counter motion. I thank you, sir.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. The motion will be voted on after the last speaker. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I think that there is an issue of precision or specification. The debate on corruption can be a very relevant debate to our mind. However, the adoption of a motion on fighting against corruption seems to me that it is not opportune. It's not the right time. The debate on the issue is relevant, but the adoption of a motion is not opportune. Why? For the same reason mentioned by the fourth vice president, who told us very clearly that within the African Union there is already a committee to fight against corruption. So what we can do here? Following a debate is to perhaps adopt a motion to strengthen the fight against corruption. Or, as the fourth vice president said, we could invite a representative of the African Union Commission to come here to tell us about that committee. But adopting a motion, knowing that a committee already exists within the African Union, that can represent a risk of people laughing at us. That means that we don't know our texts, we don't know our official documents, and it's not good for us. So I think that
the proposal mentioned by the fourth Vice President as to inviting a representative of African Union Commission to come here is the best one. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. We have reached the end of this general debate. Given the fact that the African Union already has an organ to fight against corruption, I defer the adoption of this motion until we consult with other organs. No more comments. Thank you. The clerk, you have the floor to read the second item on the agenda. Thank you.
Second item, presentation and debate on the draft motion encouraging all African states to beneficiate all their mineral and natural resources.
J'invite l'honorable Bidji.
Thank you. Honorable Bidji Butale has the floor to present his motion. Honorable, you have the floor.
I withdraw this motion so that we can go and find out if there is a beneficiation body somewhere in the AU. Thank you.
Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, vous avez la...
The clerk, you have the floor.
Okay. Next item on the agenda, presentation on the overview on the framework of African governance architecture, AGA.
Présentation et débat sur l'aperçu général.
Presentation and debate on the framework for the architecture of African governance and the role of the Pan-African Parliament on African governance. I invite Dr. Kabele Matloza, Director of the Department of Political Affairs at the African Union Commission, to make his presentation. Doctor, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, Honorable Roger Ndogo Dang, the President of the Pan-African Parliament, Excellencies, Vice Presidents, Honorable Members of Parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. It's my pleasure to stand here before you this morning to share our ideas from the African Union Commission with respect to democracy and governance on our continent, and in that discussion to highlight specifically the role of the African governance architecture. It's always my pleasure, Mr. President, to stand before this august House, and I'm always excited to talk to honorable members of Parliament, especially this House, because I myself am an aspiring parliamentarian. I look forward to, at some point, joining this House in the future. So you should help me achieve that vision. Mr. President, on a serious note, it's my pleasure and honor to address this second ordinary session of the Fourth Parliament, which began some time ago on 29th April, due to conclude on 13th May. My conversation with this august House this morning will focus mainly on democracy and governance on our continent in the context of the African Agenda 2063 that we all know, but laying special emphasis on the role of the African governance architecture and its platform. Let me begin, Mr. President, by extending to you the best wishes of the Commissioner for Political Affairs, Excellency Dr. Aisha Laraba Abdullahi, who would have loved to be with you today herself in person, but she has had to attend to other equally compelling continental obligations. That's why she's not with us this morning. It is therefore on her behalf that I shall submit this presentation to this August House this morning. I would like to begin by extending my profound gratitude to the Pan-African Parliament for its active participation in our efforts towards full operationalization of the African governance architecture and its platform. Let me also congratulate you, Mr. President, for your election as the chairperson of the inaugural Bureau of the African Governance Architecture and Platform on behalf of the Pan-African Parliament. The task that you will share with the Executive Secretary of COMESA, Mr. Sindiso Ngwenya, as the Vice Chairperson of the Bureau, supported by the African Union Commission, my department, Department of Political Affairs, as the Secretariat of the Bureau. Mr. President, let me start off this conversation with some discussion on Agenda 2063. Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. Mr. President, our continental organization celebrated its Golden Jubilee in 2013, following the establishment of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, which was transformed into the African Union in 2000. Inspired by the ideology of Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance, the African leaders reflected over the past 50 years and assessed progress made towards continental unity and integration. The celebrations also compelled the leaders to project a futuristic roadmap of how to deal with challenges that remain and deepen progress made towards deeper continental unity and integration over the next 50 years. The new revisioning of the African integration led to the adoption, Mr. President, of the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. Agenda 2063 is the 50-year development blueprint of the African Union that builds on the 1980 Lagos Plan of Action and the final act of Lagos, the 1990 treaty establishing the African Economic Community, the Abuja Treaty, and the 2000 New Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD. One of the major factors that will determine or influence the extent of its success is the entrenchment of democratic and participatory governance in all its 54 member states. Thus, the state of democracy and governance in each one of the AU member states will act as an enabler or disabler for the success or failure of Agenda 2063. It is thus not surprising that of the 7 popular aspirations expressed by African citizens during the Agenda 2063 consultations across the continent, one of the 7 aspirations is, I quote, an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights and justice, and the rule of law, close quote. This aspiration resonates with ideals of 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development Goals, especially goal number 16. The SDG number 16 focuses on peace, justice, and strong institutions. The aim of SDG number 16 is to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Thus, the centrality of democratic and participatory governance is explicitly recognized within Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. This was not the case with previous development plans under the OAU. The centrality of democratic and participatory governance is also well articulated within the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. This was not the case also with the previous Millennium Development Goals, which came to an end in 2015. The 50th anniversary solemn declaration adopted by African leaders in 2013 reinforced the centrality of governance over the next 50 years as they declared their determination to anchor our societies, governments and institutions on the respect for the rule of law, human rights and dignity, popular participation, the management of diversity, as well as inclusion and democracy. It is not surprising, therefore, that democracy and participatory governance features prominently in the first 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063, that is spanning between 2014 and 2023. It is bound to feature strongly in the subsequent 10-year implementation plans after this first plan. Mr. President, a brief overview of the AU mandate on democracy and governance is in order. You will recall, Excellencies, that upon independence in 1950s and 1960s, Africa's democratization record was rather uncertain. During the period 1960s to 1980s, few African countries embraced the culture of multi-party democracy marked by regular elections. A significant majority of our countries adopted less democratic methods of governance through military regimes or one-party rule, etc. Thus, there were more military coups than multi-party elections on our continent then. Given the OAU's doctrine of non-interference in the internal affairs of its member states, human rights abuses within member states were shielded behind sovereignty. The OAU's major preoccupation was the total decolonization of our continent, as we all know, Excellencies. The OAU, a mission which was achieved, the OAU's major priority was the total decolonization of the continent, a mission which was achieved with the demise of apartheid in South Africa, Africa's last colony, in 1994, where we are today. But this agenda is still yet to be fully accomplished, Excellencies, with the total independence of Western Sahara, which is still subjected to illegal occupation by Morocco today. Today, following the transformation of the OAU into the African Union in 1999, the situation has changed dramatically for the better in respect of Africa's governance landscape. Since the late 80s, major strides have been made by African states to democratize their societies. Africa has experienced democratic transition following the collapse of the Cold War and the demise of apartheid in Southern Africa. Cold War-induced interstate conflicts have disappeared in Africa today. Apartheid destabilization of Southern African region is today a thing of the past. However, while interstate conflicts have declined considerably, the continent is still prone to protracted intra-state conflicts, with adverse effects for peace, democracy, and development. Whereas the OAU focused on decolonization, the AU today focuses on socio-economic development, peace and security, and democracy and governance. Given the current focus of the AU on democracy, governance, and human rights, the OAU's doctrine of non-interference in internal affairs of member states has been replaced by the new AU doctrine of non-indifference to human rights abuses within member states. This new doctrine is firmly embedded within the 2000 Constitutive Act of the African Union, especially Article 4H of the Constitutive Act, the 2003 Protocol establishing the African Peace and Security Council, and the 2007 African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. The AU has undertaken concrete steps to ensure the realization of its doctrine of non-indifference by, inter alia, establishing the Pan-African Parliament. The mandate of the Pan-African Parliament in respect of promoting democracy, governance and human rights is very clear. The PAP protocol, as amended by the Malabo Summit of 2014, is very explicit, noting the following as some of the objectives of PAP, which resonate with the AU shared values. This include giving voice to the African people and the diaspora. This is the mandate of the PAP. Second, facilitating the effective implementation of policies and objectives of the AU. Third, promoting the principles of human and people's rights and democracy in Africa. Fourth, encouraging good governance, respect for the rule of law, transparency and accountability in member states. 5, promoting peace, security and stability. And 6, finally, encouraging national and regional parliaments to ratify and integrate treaties adopted by the AU into their legal systems. While the establishment and operationalization of PAP is one of the major commitments of the AU to deepening democratic and participatory governance. The other is the establishment of the African peer review mechanism by African heads of state and government in 2003 in Abuja, Nigeria. This is another noble governance initiative aimed at responding to structural root causes of political crisis and instability in Africa. Thus far, about 33 African countries have acceded to the APRM. Of this 33, about 17 have undergone self-assessment and peer review on the state of their governance arrangements. One of the culminations of the APRM reviews is the development of national programs of action, which are supposed to be implemented in order to improve governance at national level. The self-assessment and peer review address a broad gamut of governance landscape covering 4 thematic areas, namely democracy and political governance, second, economic governance and management, third, corporate governance, and 4, socio-economic development. Besides its value as a tool for deepening democratic and participatory governance, APRM is also an important early warning tool that is supposed to ensure early response and early recovery from crisis situations. It will be recalled, Excellencies, that it was the APRM report that predicted the election-related political crisis in Kenya in 2007. It will also be recalled that the APRM report also predicted xenophobic upsurge in South Africa in 2008. It was also the APRM that predicted violent extremism in Mali, which erupted in 2013. The Pan-African Parliament has a major role to play in ensuring that APRM is institutionalized, in advocating for all 54 AU member states to accede to the APRM and undergo governance reviews, in ensuring that reviewed countries implement their national programs of action effectively at national level. In this regard, it is encouraging that the new management under Professor Eddie Maloka at the APRM has started the process of bringing back the APRM into the bringing back the Pan-African Parliament into the mainstream of the APRM. The presentation and debate on the APRM reports of 5 countries, namely Benin, Mauritius, Nigeria, and South Africa, during this second session of the 4th Parliament on Tuesday, 5th May 2016, is a step in the right direction, Mr. President. Mr. President, now the strategic position and role of the African governance architecture. In order to complement the efforts of PAP and APRM, the AU policy organs have now established the African governance architecture and its platform. The AGA is inspired by the Constitutive Act of our Union, which unequivocally expresses the AU's determination to promote and protect human and people's rights, consolidate democratic institutions and culture, and ensure good governance and the rule of law. The AGA is also inspired by various AU shared values instruments, particularly the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. The historical evolution of AGA is traceable to the 2009-2012 strategic plan of the African Union Commission, which introduced as one of the pillars of the AU agenda for continental unity and integration, the notion of shared values. Through its shared values pillar, the AUC committed itself to achieve good governance, democracy, human rights, and rights-based approach to development, including social, economic, cultural, and environmental rights. In this regard, based on existing institutions and organs, the AUC committed to promote and facilitate the establishment of an appropriate architecture for the promotion of good governance. It was in January 2010, during the 16th ordinary session of the Executive Council, where the leaders adopted the decision at that level of ministers on the theme of the January-February summit, which was devoted to the shared values in Africa, in particular the putting in place of a Pan-African architecture on governance. In January-February 2010, the 14th ordinary session of the Assembly also endorsed this decision of the Executive Council through its own decision, which approved the theme of the 2011 summit devoted to shared values in Africa, in particular the putting in place of a Pan-African architecture on governance. In January 2011, the 18th Ordinary Session of the Executive Council adopted a decision in which it endorsed the strengthening of the African governance architecture through the launch of the governance platform as a mechanism to foster exchange of information, facilitate elaboration of common positions on governance, and strengthen the capacity of Africa to speak with one voice. The same Executive Council decision also called for the AUC to ensure greater synergy and coherence between African governance architecture and the African peace and security architecture. The AU Assembly of 2011 adopted a declaration on the theme of the summit towards greater unity and integration through shared values, which commended the work of the AUC on strengthening the African governance architecture and affirmed the importance of establishing the African governance platform as a basis for facilitating harmonization and coordination of initiatives in governance and democracy. The African Union Commission, through the Department of Political Affairs, launched the African governance platform in June 2012. Significantly, this launch happened during the year declared by AU policy organs as the year of shared values, that is the year 2012. To date, Mr. President, the AGA and its platform are now fully operational. The AGA has four main components: the vision, norms and standards, that is the shared values pillar; the AU organs, the institutional pillar, second; third, the AGA platform, the dialogue pillar; fourth, the African governance facility, the resource mobilization pillar. These are the four main pillars of the AGA. The AGA, in addition, has 5 clusters, namely the governance cluster, first; second, democracy cluster; third, human rights and transitional justice cluster; and constitutionalism and rule of law cluster; and fifth, finally, humanitarian assistance cluster. And all these clusters are operational as we speak, Mr. President. Besides the 5 clusters, as outlined above, there is a functioning AGA Secretariat which coordinates the work of the clusters and supports the Bureau of the AGA and its platform. The strategic value of the AGA, Mr. President, is its main mandate of structural prevention of conflict in Africa, with focus on strengthening an effective, accountable and responsive state, together with its key organs such as the Parliament, such as Parliament at national level, regional level, as well as the continental levels. In order for the AGA to be effective, it must work in complementarity with APSA, especially in conflict prevention, conflict management, and conflict transformation. Thus, the Pan-African Parliament is key and central to the effective functioning of AGA and its platform, as well as ensuring the synergy and complementarity between AGA and APSA. Maybe let me conclude on this aspect of the AGA-APSA synergy and complementarity. It is now becoming abundantly evident, Mr. President, that the major challenges for continental unity and integration in Africa are traceable to governance deficit, political instability, and development failure. Thus, the AGA will not be successful, Mr. President, in driving the AU democracy and governance agenda on its own. It will have to build synergies and complementarities with other AU architectures in order to make meaningful impact on the continent. Firstly, the AGA has to develop strong synergies with the African peace and security architecture, with its 5 pillars that we all know, namely the Continental Early Warning System; second, the Peace and Security Council; third, the Panel of the Wise; fourth, the African Standby Force; and fifth, finally, the Peace Fund. Opportunities for AGA-APSA synergies are greater in 2 main areas as a starting point. First, structural and direct prevention of conflict is one important area where the synergy between AGA and APSA can be deepened. Second is the post-conflict reconstruction and development. That's another important area where the synergy between the 2 architectures can be strengthened, and the Pan-African Parliament can play a very important mediating role in terms of ensuring the practical synergies between these architectures on those 2 areas: structural and direct prevention of conflict, as well as post-conflict reconstruction and development. I submit, Mr. President. Secondly, Mr. President, the synergy between AGA and APSA is only part of the story. The other part relates to the complementarity between AGA and the AU development architecture, especially the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD. AGA does not have to complement NEPAD in all its programs. In like manner, NEPAD does not have to complement AGA in all its 5 clusters that we outlined earlier. The most appropriate platform for the seamless synergy between AGA and NEPAD is the African peer review mechanism. In this regard, the AGA and APRM are brought together by the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. The natural meeting points between the AGA and APRM include the APRM country review reports and the AGA state reporting by member states, by state parties to the charter that have to go through the African governance platform. Those are the 2 natural meeting points: the APRM reports and the state reporting on the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. Mr. President, in conclusion, in pursuit of the African Agenda 2063, the synergy and complementarity between and among AGA, NEPAD and APSA is critical. This is so, Mr. President, because continental unity and integration requires the simultaneous pursuit of democracy, which is what the AGA does, peace, which is what APSA does, and development, which is what NEPAD and APRM do. Durable peace in Africa, Mr. President, requires a sustainable democratic setting, and vice versa. Both democracy and peace are the critical enablers for socio-economic development. In like manner, socio-economic development is key for sustainable development and durable peace. The PAP, Mr. President, as the chair of the Bureau of the AGA and its platform, can play a strategic role in ensuring synergies between and among AGA, NEPAD, APRM, and APSA. With those few remarks, Excellencies, I would like to stop here because we're going to take up more discussions on the actual role, strategic role of the Pan-African Parliament after Her Excellency, the Vice President, presents on that aspect. I would like to thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Excellencies.
Thank you very much, Director.
Now I wish to give the floor to Honorable Bernadette Lai, 4th Vice President of the Bureau of the Pan-African Parliament, to give her presentation. You have the floor, Honorable Dr. Bernadette Lai.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleague, honorable members, my presentation will be on the actual role of the Pan-African Parliament on the African governance architecture. Honorable members, the Pan-African Parliament currently is the chair of the African Governance Platform and also the chair of one of the clusters, that is on constitutionalism and the rule of law. Already, Dr. Kabila Matlosa has extensively presented to us the historical evolution of the AGA and also the platform and the 5 clusters. In that historical revolution, he has also presented to us the functions of AGA and the platforms, and also their role within the constitutive act of the African Union and the synergies that they are supposed to build within the cluster members and also the platform members. What I will do, I will now limit my presentation to the actual participation of the Pan-African Parliament in the various AGA and the platform and the cluster activities since their establishment dating back to 2009 to 2012 strategic plan of the African Union. Honorable members, at the fourth high-level meeting of the African Union under the theme Democracy, Human Rights and Governance, Trends, Challenges and Prospects, under the theme Women's Equal Participation and Leadership in Political Parties in Africa, held between the 9th and the 10th of December in Kigali, Rwanda. On the margins of this high-level dialogue, the AGA platform members met. The high-level dialogue is an annual convening of the African Union Commission, designated to provide a frank, open, and inclusive space for African governance architecture platform members, member states and non-state actors to reflect and account on the impact of their work towards consolidating democracy and strengthening good governance in Africa. The objectives of the 2015 dialogue sought to achieve three broad goals: renewed commitment of member states to ratify, domesticate, and implement the African Shared Values instruments that promote gender equality, particularly the Maputo Protocol; to enhance synergy, cooperation, and collaboration among AGA platform members in promoting gender equality and leadership of women in political parties; and lastly but not the least, critically study and understand Rwanda's success story on women empowerment and participation, with the aim of replicating the lessons in other African Union member states in regard to participation of women in political parties. Myself, the fourth Vice President, and the Deputy Clerk Fair was in attendance. Created as one of the AU organs to lead and drive the Union's democracy, human rights, and governance agenda, it was therefore not surprising that the Pan-African Parliament was elected to chair the platform. By doing so, it is a hope of platform members that PAP will be strategically positioned to influence the strategic direction, vision, mission, and objectives of AGA and also the platform. During the platform meeting, that is the first inaugural meeting of the platform, the status of operationalization of AGA and its clusters were reviewed. AGA-based and framework documents, draft rules of procedure, and state reporting guidelines, as approved by the Special Technical Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs, were also considered. The outcomes of the Arusha PRC retreat and status of the implementation recommendations were reviewed. Consideration and adoption of the flagship initiatives of 2016 project on the Year of Human Rights, with special focus on women, were considered, and the election of the Bureau of the platform conducted. Honorable members, Mr. President, some of the key outcomes and actionable points of that inaugural platform meeting included, but not limited to, the following: designation of AGA focal persons to improve coordination and information flow; carry out a comprehensive needs assessment; seek legal opinion on status of judicial organs in the platform. This was very important because the African Court of Human Rights sits on that platform, and that is the court. Should the African Union organs have any legal issue, that is a platform that should adjudicate. So it was discussed whether, in fact, it was prudent for the African Court to sit on the platform and take part in the deliberations. What happens if there are legal challenges? Then you cannot be the player and also the referee. So this is under serious consideration. improve coordination among AU organs and regional economic communities, facilitate information flow among platform members, expedite approval of the TOR for the PRC Subcommittee on Democracy, Elections and Governance, regularly engage and enhance linkages with the Panel of the Wise, one of the clusters of the NEPAD, implement decision concerning enhancing AGA-APSA synergies, engage and participate in activities of Project 2016, ensure participation of all platform members in the high-level dialogue that is to take place 2016 in Rwanda, rules of procedures and annexes to be harmonized, ensure clear delineation between the work of the Department of Political Affairs and the clusters of AGA, ensure the study of constitutionalism, highlighting good practices, promote and exchange active participation of women and youth, establish PRC Subcommittee on Democracy, Human Rights and Transitional Justice, Governance, Constitutionalism and Rule of Law, and convening of AGA platform meeting to review the implementation of Project 2016. I think tomorrow this meeting will be convened here within the precincts of Parliament in the morning hours. And also AGA platform review the AGA platform strategy and action plan of 2016 to 2017. Also the AGA communication strategy and the AGA youth engagement strategies, to name a few of the outcomes and the actionable points that emanated from that meeting. Constitutionalism and rule of law. PAP was elected as chairperson for constitutionalism and rule of law, which is one of the 5 clusters of the AGA, in a meeting on African governance platform from the 2nd to the 5th of August 2015 in Algiers, in Algeria. Constitutionalism and rule of law have as objectives the promotion and enhancement of adherence to the principles of rule of law and enhanced constitutional order in Africa. If we look at our ACDEG, that is our African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Good Governance, Chapter 4 deals with the rule of law under Articles 4 to 10. And for constitutionalism, it deals with you find it in Chapter 8 and Article 23 to 26. The cluster also seeks to support African Union state constitutional and institutional reforms and rebuilding, especially those emerging from conflict. We know that most times when countries emerge from conflict, there is a dire need for constitutional reform, especially when most of the time the conflicts are as a result of either the non-adherence to the constitutions. As a result of the election of PAP as the chairman for constitutionalism and rule of law, a regional meeting with the representatives of the judiciary to strengthen the rule of law and justice reform in South Africa was held from the 30th November to the 2nd December 2015 at the precinct of PAP. The meeting was attended by the representatives of the judiciary as a key stakeholder in the promotion of constitutionalism and rule of law. It was organized within the framework of the AGA as the overall political and institutional framework aimed at connecting, empowering, and building capacities and appropriate responses to the challenges of governance in Africa for African Union institutions and organs. Adherence to the rule of law is essential to a thriving democracy where governments and citizens are equal and accountable under the law. This meeting was organized by the AGA Cluster on Constitutionalism and Rule of Law as part of its mandate to promote constitutionalism and rule of law in Africa. The first regional meeting, as one of the outcomes of this meeting, will be a meeting held in the SADC region. That is the Southern African Development Community, which is made up of 15 countries, and aims to further regional economic cooperation and integration, as well as political and security operation among the 15 South African states. Its aim is to build institutions to promote economic development where human rights, democracy, and the rule of law are observed. This objective is in line with Article 2 Subclause 2 of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Good Governance, which encourages the promotion and adherence of the principles of rule of law, premised upon the respect for and the supremacy of the Constitution and the constitutional order. African Governance Platform Technical Meeting. PAP participated in the African Governance Platform Technical Meeting held in Cape Town, South Africa, on the 15th of February 2016. Professor Murad Mokhtari, Clerk of the Parliament, led the PAP delegation to participate in the planning workshop aimed at developing a steering structure and a strategy to guide the implementation of the next phase of the GIZ support to the AGA process. Towards this overall objective, the workshop aimed to provide a space for reflection, exchange and sharing along individual and collective potentials within the ongoing AGA process. The outcomes of the technical meeting, among others, were that all platform members should engage in the AGA flagship programs for the effective operationalization of the AGA and its platforms, organize a roundtable meeting for partners on funding for AGA platform initiatives. The African Governance Platform members to submit periodic reports to the AGA Secretariat as well as annual work plans to the AGA Secretariat to inform annual planning and budgeting for the platform. As a result, the report on the initiatives for the platform and the RECs should have a central role in the Project 2016 initiatives, including the planning and convening of the high-level dialogue on the theme of this year, which is human rights, with special focus on women, to be held in Kigali, I think, sometime this year. Advocacy on the signing, ratification, and deposition of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Good Governance. Your Excellencies, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, the PAP is opportune to have effectively utilized its strategic position and representation in over 50 member states to promote the ratification, domestication, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of the African Union Shared Values Instrument, including the African Charter on Democracy and Governance, the Maputo Protocol, and more especially the Pan-African Parliament Revised Protocol, which will endow its legislative powers to make model laws that will influence the well-being of African citizens. Furthermore, the PAP is strategically positioned to connect AU organs, the regional economic communities, and relevant stakeholders, including civil society, in order to deepen popular participation and citizens' engagement in the attainment of democracy, good governance, respect for human rights and people's rights. Debate on the APRM assessment report. Honorable members, in the last 2 years, we have received and debated extensively the African Peer Review Mechanism country reports of Burkina Faso, Algeria, Benin, South Africa, Ghana, Uganda, and Ethiopia in this House. It is time we move a step further to promote the implementation of the recommendations in our various member states and play our oversight role effectively. The PAP should further leverage on this rare opportunity of being the chairperson of the AGA platform and the cluster to put in place mechanisms and procedures for effective operations of the AGA platform, ensure the operationalization and visibility of some of the clusters. With the experience that we have had, we are an invaluable resource that will drive this platform in the right direction. Ratification of the PAP Revised Protocol. It is envisaged that with the ratification of the PAP Revised Protocol, that will endow us with the legislative powers, the PAP will have the capacity to develop model laws in relation to almost all the 5 clusters of AGA, including constitutionalism and rule of law, humanitarian affairs, human rights and governance and democracy clusters. Implementation of Project 2016. To demonstrate PAP's commitment, leadership and capacity to deliver on the implementation of Project 2016, PAP has dedicated Thursday, 12th May 2016, to Pan-African Day on Human Rights, with special focus on the rights of women, the theme of the AU for 2016. No less personalities than the Director of Gender Program, NEPAD, Director, Women, Gender and Development of the African Union Commission, Regional Advisor on Gender, UNFPA, Southern and Eastern African Region Bureau, Representative of Human Rights in Sahrawi, Chairpersons of Committee on Gender, Family, Youth, and persons with disabilities, and the chairperson of the Women Caucus of the PAP, to name a few, will be making presentations on various human rights issues pertaining to women. Honourable members, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we need to deepen our involvement in election observation, both in pre, during, and post-elections, and explore participation in human rights observation missions. We should therefore buy into this agenda, and as the chair of the AGA platform, play our rightful role in ensuring that the voices of the citizens of Africa are heard. Thank you for your kind attention.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. The general debate is now open. I have with me a list of 22 speakers. Honorable Faisal, Honorable Martin Terese, Honorable Enasian Berun Korundu, Honorable Enias Ndebo Akanda of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Honorable Sitaya Menali Tisazo from Ethiopia, Honorable Ali Bursina from Burkina Faso, Honorable Jallo from Guinea-Conakry, Honorable Bashir Matani from Sudan, Honorable David Ernest Sevende from Tanzania, Honorable Tekele Tezema from Ethiopia, Honorable John Traore from Guinea-Conakry, Honorable Suleiman Sese from Sierra Leone, Honorable Ngoba from Burundi, Honorable Traore from Mali, Honorable Khaltoum Abdelkarim Suleiman from Sudan, Honorable Ejan Farapaka from Liberia, Honorable May Abdul from Egypt, Honorable Abdul Razak Said Namdaz from Nigeria, Honorable Claude Dime Makanga from Sierra Leone, Honorable Sulaiman from Sahrawi, Honorable Idris Sultan Azmi from Sudan, Honorable Omar Bashir Ahmed from Guinea. I give the floor to the first speaker, Honorable Faisal Dini from Tunisia. Honorable member, you have the floor. Mr. President, what is the time given to each speaker? What is the time given to us? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. We have in our hands a very important report, important to the African people, and this report deals with the African governance. Because we don't have much time, I shall focus on the 9th part, and it refers to the participation of citizens in democracy and African complementarity. These slogans we have hoped would be practical, because the African citizens have a role to play only in some countries. Allow me now to deal with the economic issues. We refer here to the regional economic communities. We would have liked the African Union to announce the establishment of an African common market so as to promote bilateral trade among African states. Would have liked to see the announcement of a single currency in Africa, as in the case of Europe, but we did not hear anything about that. The report also deals with the role of the Pan-African Parliament. It refers to the protection of the Constitution. But we would like the Pan-African Parliament, which represents the basic organ and the representative of the people, would have liked PAP to have a legislative role. this Pan-African Parliament has to have a legislative role to protect the African peoples against all sorts of economic and social crimes and the humanitarian crimes against the African people. Another important issue is the African panel on combating corruption. We would like to know which countries have not ratified the this panel. We would like to know about these countries because we need transparency and clarity these days. Corruption has destroyed our infrastructure and peoples, and it has caused the spread of poverty. Combating corruption is the basis of saving our people. This is a scourge that is destroying Africa. There is also the question of NEPAD. Does NEPAD follow up the decisions it produces? Particularly with regard to the 15% of the budget of African states allocated to agriculture. We know that agriculture is related to national food security, but I think that NEPAD is not following up this through. Thank you. Honorable Mata Nitsereste from Burundi. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm giving the floor to the Honourable Ignatien Dira Ikundu from Rwanda. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much for the presentation on the African Governance Architectural Platform. Mr. President, the AGP began in 2011, and the first objective was to accelerate the ratification of the instruments for governance for the Pan-African Parliament. And since its constitutive act, there are several countries that have ratified, and the Charter of Human Rights was signed by 54 countries. And 5 years ago, we created this instrument to produce better governance, but 5 years later, there is still a problem. And Rwanda, Gabon, Ethiopia, and various other countries have ratified the Charter. But what my question is to find out how are we going to evaluate the efficiency of this platform if 5 years after it's created, the problems still persist? How are we going to make these instruments that were adopted voluntarily by heads of state and government, how are we going to make sure that they're going to be effective? Thank you very much. Merci. Thank you very much. Honourable Inyas, the Honourable from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you, Mr. President. I hope that you're not going to cut me off because my intervention is going to be a little bit longer. Mr. President, the presentation on the AGP was excellent in terms of its objectives and the principles behind it. However, Mr. President and esteemed colleagues, everywhere in the world, in the north, in the south, in the west, and in the east, modern governance is governed by three pillars: legislative powers, executive powers, and judicial powers. And these are completed So these are complementary but are independent in their functions. However, we can only achieve good governance, in my point of view, with legislative powers that are strong, with a good judiciary that is absolutely autonomous. And in terms of the legislative powers of the AGP, I didn't hear in the presentation the role of the judicial powers. We can only achieve good governance with strong judicial powers. But the presentation did not cover this. As brilliant as the presentation was, they didn't talk about the judicial powers. And I also didn't hear in the presentation that there was a possibility for strengthening capacity in terms of judicial powers within the states. If judicial power is strengthened in the different states and it is independent, then we will make progress, and those who have legislative power will be held accountable. And so I would like to suggest that in our different states we have to aim for having very strong judicial institutions more than aiming for having strong leaders. Thank you very much. I give the floor to the Honourable Sitiye Minale Tizazu from Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank you very much for the two presenters, which is very clear and precise. After saying this, I want to contribute on regarding to three issues. That is one about the ratification and domestication of this AGPA. I heard that there are very small number of countries which ratified this AGPA, so I think it needs, we passed more than 3-4 years, but still it is not going faster, so we have to work on it to make these countries, all of African countries which we are presenting here, to ratify and domesticate, because it is a priority and it is starting to go to the implementation. So the next one which I would like to say something about is the implementation. For the implementation, one, it needs a very strong institutions in all respective countries, and even the AU. Institutions are very important, strong institutions with efficient and timing activities has to be proceed. And the other is the participation of the people. I think the people has their great role to play on this issue, to bring good governance and to minimize even corruption regarding to bring development to the Africa, the continent as a whole. And the other thing is commitment within the government, within the institutions. It is very important that is we have to commit ourselves to bring Africa forward, to use Africa its resources properly, to build different growing and development issues in respective countries, in our respective countries. As a whole, it brings Africa to bring development. And the other is that is, as we are PAP as a chairperson for this AGPA, this is a good opportunity for us to play our role in the oversight and the follow-up. It needs a very serious follow-up that we are a chairperson and we have to use this opportunity. And as a parliamentarian, one of our activities is oversight what we have done here in. It should not be simply talking about here and living as it is. We have to follow the progress. What is going on? What changes are coming? How our people are benefited from these things? So I think.
I thank you very much. Je voudrais maintenant
I would now like to give the floor to the Honorable Ali Doussam from Burkina Faso. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the two speakers who gave us some very useful information. I would first of all like to make an observation. I'm not sure if those who received the French version of this presentation, I'm not sure if the French speakers noticed that the translation that was given to us, in the translation there was certain information lacking compared to the English version. But with regards to the presentation, we have noted the objectives and the principles of the African Union with regards to the AGP. And as some others have said, the objectives are very laudable. But we have to underline that the instruments like the Charter, the African Court, these are very important instruments, but for me, my main concern is to know whether the early warning system, whether this system has been put in place and used effectively yet. Thank you very much. Pardon me. The floor is given to the Honorable Diallo from Guinea-Conakry. Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to congratulate the presenters, Dr. Matloza and the Honorable Dr. Bernadette Lae. And it is a presentation on a very important issue for Africa. The AGP has a very important objective to have an Africa that is democratic and at the service of its citizens. And in this context, and in terms of the commitment of the African Union and its members, I have some concerns about the AGP, and I would like to focus on political governance. The first speaker spoke about the non-indifference doctrine, and this after the Algiers Declaration and the Lomé Declaration, and the change of governments and the promotion of democracy in Africa. However, what we have noticed is, despite all our efforts, conflicts persist, especially intra-state conflicts. And there was a declaration by NEPAD that was encouraging the African leaders to observe their constitutions and ensure that their constitutions reflected good governance and democracy. But even though this declaration was heard, it doesn't seem to have been put into practice, and this because of the limits of mandates of certain bodies. And there is always, it seems, the temptation to ignore good practices in favor of conflict. And I would therefore like to ask the AGP to please find mechanisms in order to dissuade leaders from manipulating constitutions, and also I would like to congratulate those leaders who do manage to respect their constitutions, who manage to leave office at the end of their mandate, and who do not abuse their power, like Benin. Excuse me. Can I just finish, Mr. President, if you will? I beg your indulgence. Benin, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Tanzania, South Africa, the Seychelles, etc. These are countries that have worked really hard to ensure that the institutions of their country are strong institutions and that power is passed peacefully from one government to the next. Thank you very much. I give the floor to the Honorable Bashir Ali Al-Batani from Sudan.
Je donne la parole à l'honorable.
I give the floor to the Honorable David Ernest Silende from Tanzania.
Asante sana Mheshimiwa Mwenyekiti.
Very much, Mr. President, for giving me this opportunity to speak about this presentation that has been presented here. President, when we're talking about the architecture of the Africa, it's a lot of things, and it's very important. And we want democracy, human rights, and good governance. But, Mr. President, us as members of Parliament, we see that we have no authority of AGP in Africa and its institutions. What we see that in Africa is just that we are just talking. Now, we are just talking about the report that the Vice President had written. It's being shown that us as members of Parliament, Pan-African Parliament needs to have its full legislative powers so that they can make they can make rules. As Africa, it has to be taken like with people that has been passed as it is. If we continue, we are being just a parliament that is talking. We want free elections, and also we want things to be moving. We see that we don't have priorities. We have to have priorities. We have to have a voice when we are talking about. We've been given chairmanship. Us as Pan-African Parliament, we have to know that the Pan-African Parliament is known everywhere in every country, that there's a Pan-African Parliament that is existing, that is talking about all the problems that we have in Africa, and we can be able to have full legislative powers. We want to have enough time so that we can consult everybody, and also ministries that are concerned with all this. All of them, we need to talk with one voice so that we can be able that this issue can be treated well. When we have our aims, we need to have like the Central Africa. Another thing is this: we should not just be people who talk. We have to be in a position that we have to have commitments, and that this architecture is worked on the way it is. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Kasema from Ethiopia.
I would also like to thank the presenters that they briefed us a very important points on the very important topic. Regarding the governance of Africa, we have been talking about corruption, socio-political governance, economic governance, and so on. In this regard, when we come to the institutional capacity to implement what we are talking and what we are setting to implement is the most important. In this regard, when Obama visited to Ghana in his first tenure, he said that Africa needs not strong leaders, but strong institutions. Having said that, I want to raise the issue of capacity or institutional strength in the case of AU and as well as PAP. My predecessor said that it's very clear that PAP has to have the legislative power. Unless and otherwise, we have a mandate to oversight the problems that occur in African countries we can not be able to oversight, we cannot be able to control, and so on. In this regard, I share the issue of the legislative mandate, and furthermore, I think it's very important to have standards, what we are talking about, and we have to have action plans, what we are talking about to implement, and also there must be targets. When do we want to achieve these plans, and so on. Unless and otherwise, unless we set the standards, the measures, and also the action plans for the problems that we are raising, we cannot go to the targets, or we cannot achieve the problems so far. In this regard, it is better to have our action plan for the ratification of our protocol, and we have action plan. We do have action plan to implement the problems that we are raising in this House, as well as in the AU level, and so on. So that is very important to have this one. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to the Honourable Jantun Taure from Guinea-Conakry. Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I would like to congratulate the speakers for their excellent presentations. And we would like to congratulate them for the work that was done, and all those who participated in the work of the AGP, and in the context of the important promotion of good governance and the respect of human rights and equitable justice. And these are essential elements for ensuring social development over this continent. And the leaders of our countries should make a commitment and have the political will to follow these principles, and we, as members of Parliament, should encourage our leaders to fulfill their mission in this regard. And the question I would like to ask is the following. Do you not think that the role played by the Human Rights Commission of the African Union and the African Commission for Human Rights and the Rights of People, do you not think that these two committees have very similar roles? And in the African Union and within the PAP, we often talk about budgetary constraints and the effect of these budgetary constraints on the work of our institutions. And therefore, in my humble opinion, I think that it would be more efficient if the African Union and other institutions considered this kind of thing in terms of their administration. Honourable Suleiman MCC from Sierra Leone.
President, for giving me the opportunity to contribute. And I thank the presenters for having presented a brilliant report. Mr. President, the colonial masters gave us independence in the 50s and the 60s. The question I ask is this: was independence given to us in reality, or it was a farce? To me, it is the same old talk, and nothing being done. I place this problem squarely in the hands of our colonial masters and the Western powers, who gave us this independence in the 50s and 60s, but they did not really live. The politics of divide and rule is real. Even as we speak, is real today in Africa. The AU, AGA, PAP, it's all the same, trying to divide us. The politics of Israel, they told us that we have independence, but they turned around and told our military that they have a right to overthrow legitimate governments. They did it. The first one was in Togo. Sylvanus Olympio was overthrown through the behest of France, the colonial master. They never left. Kwame Nkrumah, the president of Ghana, once said, political independence without economic independence is meaningless because we depend on Western powers for all our funding. So to us, independence will be meaningless to us. It's all the same talk. Mr. President, I suggest that we create a mechanism that can finance the Pan-African Parliament. This way we can be independent from all external influence. If we don't do that, then we'll have a problem. Ratifying the protocol is a key to this African Parliament. Talking about the role, AGA, PAP, it's meaningless to me if we don't ratify the protocol. The protocol is the key to all this debate. Having said that, Mr. President, I thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, please excuse me for taking the floor. We have an urgent issue from Madam Her Excellency Dlamini Zuma, who has asked the Parliament to change its agenda so that the Vice President can present the budget on Tuesday instead of later in the week. And the Honourable Dlamini Zuma requires a response later today. So forgive us for this potential change. There are urgent matters that do sometimes crop up. So presentation of the budget will take place on Tuesday instead of Wednesday, and I will speak to the Secretariat because I think that elections have to take place in the afternoon so that we keep time. Thank you. I'm giving the floor to the Honourable Muwe Baba from Burundi. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the two presenters for their very clear and excellent presentations. And my concern is with regard to the challenges from 1963 to 2016. Many years have passed. And what evaluation can we make of this period of time between 1963 and 2016? And what are we going to do to achieve the Agenda 2062? Sorry, what have we done to achieve Agenda 2016? And I would also like to know, in terms of good governance, what role have we allocated for the media in terms of protecting democracy and good governance? And in many countries, we talk of them as the fourth power. And they have been very instrumental in the implementation of fundamental rights for citizens in Africa, especially the right to information. So the role of the media. Thank you. I give the floor to the Honourable Sekou Toure from Mali. Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to echo the compliments made by my colleagues for the two presenters. The presentations were very clear. And that being said, I would like to focus on the issue of ratification, because we have worked on documents and instruments, but if our governments do not ratify the different documents that allow for the evaluation and the follow-up of the efficiency of this platform, then I think that all our efforts will be in vain. So my proposal is that this chamber, which is in effect the legislative power of the African Union, that this chamber make sure that all the judicial instruments that are available and that all the instruments for evaluation and follow-up be implemented as soon as possible. And if we manage to achieve this, then we will be able to halt the brain drain and other challenges that we are faced with. And therefore, my brothers and sisters, representatives of the people of Africa, I really beg you to please help us to achieve at least 50% of our mission. Honorable Abdel Karim Suleiman from Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the opportunity in participating in this debate. I'd like to thank the presenters. If we mention corruption, actually are many, many aspects of our life. We need to take this seriously, especially in the Pan-African Parliament, so that we can end this scourge. During my intervention, I should like to emphasize the fact that the Pan-African Parliament must be a legislative body so that we are able to adopt laws, effect some control of those who have the highest posts. In terms of the African governance architecture, I think that we need to have true and real democracy in our countries. And if we want good governance, we need to make sure that the governments need to ensure participation of all political parties, whether it be the governing party or the opposition parties. So we need to remember that there are many regions in our countries, and all African people must find development and services that improves their lives. And with the current condition, this is why young people are leaving our continent and risking their lives, drowning in the Mediterranean. Populations must participate in the decision-making process. And this will allow them to express their opinions, to express themselves vis-à-vis the public powers. Freedom of expression is a very important issue indeed. So African countries in general must review conventions and framework agreements governing human rights so that African peoples can live in freedom. Thank you.
Eugene Fala.
Eugene Fala Porta from Liberia has the floor. Thank you.
To the presenters for having chronicled a very good report that I believe is in the interest of all of us, especially those of us who are representing Africa. I believe the achievement of good governance in Africa is a laudable initiative. All those good plans, policies, and blueprints are good. But we Africans are good at organizing. We Africans are good at putting blueprints. We Africans are good at putting policies together. If I should grade Africans, African governments, for putting policies together, I will give us A. But when it comes to implementation, that is the crux of the matter. I'm sorry to say I give us F. When it comes to implementation, we continue to put policies together, as good as they may be. But when it comes to implementation, we stumble. That is our problem. To achieve governance, we should avoid cronyism. We should avoid tribalism. We should avoid religious sentiments. If a man is qualified, don't judge him because he is a Muslim or he is a Christian or he is an atheist. For us to achieve, we need to put people to the right places, irrespective of their religious backgrounds. And let me say kudos to the people of Great Britain, London. They just elected a man who I believe was not elected on the basis of his background. Not because he's a Muslim, but they elected him because they feel that he can have the job done. And let me say thanks to the PAP. Now that they have given the PAP the opportunity to chair this particular committee, it's good. But we need to do some soul searching. It's often said that charity begins at home, at the PAP. Are we hiring, are we recruiting on the basis of competence? Or because I'm a Liberian, so I hire people from Liberia, even if they are qualified or not? Or because I'm from South Africa, I hire people from South Africa, whether or not they are qualified. I think that is the inherent problem that Africa has, even in our various countries. Because I belong to this tribe, and I'm placed in a position of trust, authority. Because I belong to this tribe, and I'm placed in a position of trust, I hire people from my tribe, whether or not they are qualified. That is the problem we have in our various countries. Let us, for governance to work in Africa, let's put people to the right places, irrespective of where they come from, irrespective of their religion, irrespective of their color, irrespective of whatever associations they may be part of. I think if we do that, then governance will work in Africa. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. The floor goes to May Abdullah from Egypt.
سيادة الرئيس على إتاحة هذه الفرصة.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the presenters for the quality of their presentations. I agree with everything that has been said. The colleague from Liberia has mentioned the fact that Africa must reach adequate development level. The first principle to achieve that is governance, tolerance, and then participation. We also need to continue to apply the principle of transparency and participate in the decision-making process. And this is why we need to work together in our countries. It is important also that all African countries have a level of development that is adequate, and for that we need proper conditions in our countries, amongst which we need to make sure that the people in power cannot use that to attain personal objectives. We need to have a judiciary system that is efficient and effective to apply legislations that govern governance. We also need a system that is capable of implementing all these conditions, agreements, etc. And lastly, we need infrastructures and necessary products that are the minimal conditions for education and health. If we benefit from all of that, then we will be able to talk about good governance in all African countries. We need to apply all these conditions in all our countries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable Abdul Razak from Nigeria.
Abdul Razak.
Abdul Razak. Claude T.M. Kamanda from Sierra Leone then has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I join other MPs to thank the two presenters for the well-researched presentation. Mr. President, honorable members, having read the document and listened attentively to the presenters, I now understood AGA on three folds. That one, AGA expresses the AU's determination to promote and protect human and people's rights, consolidate democratic institutions and culture, and ensure good governance and the rule of law. Two, that the ideals of AGA are further reinforced by the norms, pronouncements, decisions, and instruments of particularly the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance, ADEC. Three, that AGA was established to stand as a platform for dialogue between the various stakeholders who are mandated to promote good governance and strengthen democracy in Africa. Mr. President, honorable members, I have two concerns. One, that the very ideal on which AGA was established is yet to get its force of law, and that is the African Charter on Democracy, Election, and Good Governance. As we speak, only 24 nations have ratified it, and most of it, the Maputo Protocol, is yet to get its force of law. Two, Mr. President, honorable members, one of the main stakeholders, that is PAP, whose vision was to have and use its legislative power on promoting democracy, governance, and human rights, is yet to get its force of law and now acts as the chair of AGA. As we speak, only 3 countries have ratified it, my country being one, Sierra Leone. My question is, Mr. President, honorable members, how serious are we to champion the agenda of Africans? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I should like to give the floor to Honorable Sulima Emamet El-Kaid from Western Sahara.
Gracias, señor presidente. Me uno a mis compañeros para agradecer y felicitar a los dos ponentes por sus brillantes ponencias.
I should like to thank the presenters for the quality of the presentations. Many things that I wanted to say have been said, so I will not repeat them. I'm going to try to express myself on this very important issue for all Africans. In order to arrive at good governance and to implement it, which we need to encourage leaders to adhere to constitutions, because it is useless to make all sorts of efforts to elect a president, to have elections in transparency, and then after that, governments or the leader himself or himself do everything they can to stay in power or to change the constitution whenever they feel like it. So we need to avoid all these continual changes within constitutions. Also, I believe that it is our responsibility, the right and the duty to fight all together to make sure that the Pan-African Parliament has this legislative power to ensure that these legal instruments are respected in our respective countries. In order for all of this to be respected, we need to urge leaders to adhere to the rule of law. It is also very important that those who do not respect the rule of law and those who change constitutions and those who violate human rights in their respective countries are not protected in other African countries. Because if we continue to behave in this way, we will never get out of this situation. If a country violates these legal instruments, and if a country changes the constitution when it sees fit, it is absolutely useless to continue on the path of making great efforts for elections. I share the position of Sierra Leone. I echo what he has said, to say that as long as there is external or outside influence, as long as there are foreign countries that interfere in our affairs, we will never be free or totally independent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sultan Hashim from Sudan.
شكرا أخي الرئيس نسبة
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the presenters of the two papers. The two papers have dealt with the issue of good governance. Allow me to say that since the establishment of the African Union and since the declaration of CIRT 1999, which led to the establishment of the African Union and the Constitutive Act, the Pan-African Parliament was established under the umbrella of the African Union. My question, Mr. President, what have we been able to achieve in this long period of time? And this really takes us to consider the principles and the objectives discussed in the two papers. We now see that tremendous efforts have been made, but the outcome is very modest. Therefore, the Pan-African Parliament and the African Union have to make more efforts to review these objectives so that we can implement our decisions. Otherwise, we will waste more time. The question of good governance is not well defined in the area of accountability. And good governance is an approach to economic development and justice when they are not effective. But good governance regulates all these issues. Now, good governance is based on the rule of law, the right of people to govern themselves. And this is related to the French concept of a high authority that evaluates all other authorities. This is a theoretical issue that has come under criticism. We Muslims and believers on this planet believe that God is the sole source of authority on earth, in land, sea, space, and everywhere. God is the highest authority.
Thank you very much, dear colleague.
Merci beaucoup, chers collègues.
Thank you. Honorable Bashir Ali Mohammed El Batini from Sudan has the floor.
Parole est à l'honorable.
And the floor goes to Honorable Jamila Debesh from Tunisia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to greet honorable members. I thank the speakers for the quality of their presentations. At the outset, I wish to address 5 main items. Of course, we talked about this in the past, but I think that talking about this is important. Democracy is at the heart of good governance, and good governance is at the heart of development and progress. This can only be achieved through good political governance. Political governance requires plurality and freedom of political participation and the peaceful alternation in power. We also need to consider the respect for human rights and the organization of transparent and free elections on the basis of a true competition among politicians. I believe that these are the pillars of good governance which we need to put in place. The second pillar is the liberation of African people from new colonization and the exploitation of their resources. This has become a curse in Africa and not a blessing. As indicated by my colleague, Africa is rich but has poor populations. So we need to have our own governance of our own natural resources. Now I have a question to the 2 speakers on the relationship between the African governance and the other organs within the African Union. Allow me to address the issue of corruption. Corruption requires good governance and institutions that can deal with it. We also need to have legislation, and we need to disseminate the values of transparency and accountability. Another issue is the combating corruption, which requires a political will. And it requires a fair judicial system. We need to address the issue of the judiciary in relation to this particular question. I would like to know more about international efforts to combat corruption that was not addressed. We all know that corruption is a transborder crime. Let me now talk about Tunisia as a model. At the level of our own parliament, we have a standing committee and a set of legislation that supports combating corruption and promotes good governance. I need 1 more minute, Mr. President. Also, in relation to the judicial system, now we have a High Council of the Judiciary, and we have also a Constitutional Committee that combats corruption. We hope that this will enable us to lay the foundations of good governance. I have a question to the 4th speaker. How can we choose success stories in the area of women's rights? I believe that the Tunisian experience is worthy of presentation and consideration. Mr. President, this is a question to you. Why don't we organize a training workshop for the new members to know more about the African Union and its and the related organs, including the Pan-African Parliament, and this will enable the new members to be more effective in their role. I thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Honorable Claudine Prudence from Benin. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for the floor. Please allow me, Mr. President, to congratulate the presenters for the quality of the papers presented. Mr. President, concerning these issues, we have heard the two motions that we are debating upon. There is a link between the resources of countries and the fight against corruption. Many countries allow external countries to interfere in their affairs and to exploit and waste their environment. The development of these resources is meant to generate revenue that would allow true accelerated development for the continent. Over and above resources, we need to remember that there needs to be job creation. Economic operators from other countries sometimes come and allow the development of these services themselves, whereas Africans themselves are expert enough to engage in the development of their continent. This kind of situation has been spoken about for many years in Benin, in DRC, and in other countries. And it is for that reason, Mr. President, that I am totally in favor of the motion of the struggle for corruption in Africa and for the motion that says that Africa should enjoy all its mining resources as well as services and expertise given by African experts. Thank you. Thank you very much. The general debate is now closed. I should like to now invite Dr. Kabele to respond to the issues raised. Please, could you come to the front, Dr. Kabele? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And let me also thank the honorable members of Parliament for engaging with the debate. And it's very, very interesting that we've had such a rich exchange of ideas. I would like to try, Your Excellency, to respond, Mr. President, with your permission, to all these issues that have been raised. And some of them are comments that I think, by and large, I agree with. But let me do justice to the issues as tabled before us. Mr. President, starting with Tunisia, the first issue was on the Tunisia appreciated the importance or reinforced the importance of democratic governance in Africa, in particular participation of citizens in the democratic processes. I think we're all agreed on that. Tunisia raised a concern that we didn't highlight the role of regional economic communities in promoting intra-Africa trade towards also establishment of single currency on the continent. Let me just highlight to the honourable member from Tunisia that, in fact, we made reference to flagship projects of Agenda 2063. We didn't discuss those in detail. But one of those flagship projects of Agenda 2063 speaks to the commitment by African leaders towards the establishment of continental free trade area of the continent, continental free trade area in Africa, in pursuance of the 1991 Abuja Treaty, establishing the African Economic Community. And that continental free trade agenda, it also includes the possibility of introducing the common currency. So let's hope when we reach there, when we reach that milestone, we would have addressed your concern. But the continental free trade also will also speak to our mission to ensure that we have free movement, not only of goods and services in Africa, but also free movement of people, African peoples themselves, being able to freely move across borders in their own continent. Because presently, we still face serious restrictions in moving within our continent because of visa controls, visa restrictions across our borders, which inhibit our people from even doing business within our own continent. Yet, in fact, when you look at the extent to which foreign investors are able to move within our continent, it's a contrast. European investors are able to move easily within our continent, but Africans themselves are not able to move. So that's an issue that also PAP could take up as an issue. And the AU is already taking up that issue presently as we speak. And Chair, the issue about the role of PAP, I think I will also leave to the Vice President to tackle. But broadly, I agree with all honourable members of Parliament that have raised the issue that until and unless PAP is given full legislative powers, PAP will not be effective. Let's just deal with that issue once and for all and put it aside. If PAP is not given full legislative powers, PAP will remain a toothless bulldog. It's a fact. PAP will remain ineffective. And we all support the PAP in that direction and towards the universal ratification of the protocol, the amended protocol establishing PAP as per the Malabo decision. We all support that initiative, and we're happy to work with PAP to ensure that that protocol is ratified by all members of the Union and implemented effectively. And Mr. President, the issue by Rwanda on the acceleration of ratification of shared values instruments, I agree with the Rwandan, the input by the honourable member from Rwanda on that. And just to update here, that in response to the question, how many people have ratified, how many member states or how many member states of the AU have ratified the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance? So far, I think we are at 25 only. We are at 25. Yet the Charter was adopted in 2007, and the Charter came into force in 2012, but we are at 25 out of a total membership of 54 AU member states. And this is really an indictment. And I think we can commit here, all of us, to ensure that we push for we are pushing for universal ratification of the African Charter on Democracy, Election and Governance, and we call upon PAP to join forces with us to ensure that we have a larger number of member states ratifying the Charter, not only ratifying, but also domesticating and implementing the Charter. And we would like to make this clarion call to the PAP, in particular this year being the year of human rights, the Africa Year of Human Rights, with special focus on the rights of women, Mr. President. The DRC, Mr. President, I think I agreed 100% with the analysis of the DRC, the honourable member of Parliament from DRC, in articulating the way the key pillars of our governance systems in Africa, namely legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. And I also agree 100% with him that for us to move forward and advance the democracy and governance agenda of our union effectively, we have to lay more emphasis on strengthening the judiciary and strengthening parliaments. And in that regard, containing the dominance of the executive. The executive power has to be contained, has to be restrained, has to be cut down to size, so that you give enough power to the legislature and to the judiciary. That's what would then result into a balance of the separation of powers and checks and balances that are required in the governance system. So I agree 100%, Mr. President, with that sentiment from the honourable member from DRC. Honourable member from Ethiopia, the intervention on strong institutions. Yes, and in fact, the two interventions from Ethiopia actually speak to each other. The first one and the second. In terms of emphasizing, maybe I can take them, I can couple them together. In terms of emphasizing the importance of institutions, we agree. Without strong, resilient, and efficient institutions, there's no way we can have democracy thriving on our continent. We therefore need strong, resilient, and effective institutions in all our countries. It's a fact. But let's also not forget that we also need visionary and transformative leaders. So when Obama said we need to emphasize more on institutions and less on personalities, yes, but we also need strong, visionary and transformative leaders, much as we also need an active and vibrant civil society, an active and vibrant citizen engagement. So three things are important, Mr. President. One, yes, strong, resilient and effective institutions. One. Two, visionary and transformative leaders. Third, citizen engagement through an organized civil society. So those three are important in terms of driving the democracy and governance agenda, Mr. President. And the PAP, this I said I'm going to leave to Excellency the Vice President. The PAP playing its rightful role as the chair of the AGA platform is in a good position, I agree. This is the statement by Ethiopia, I agree. But Ethiopia goes further to say, then we need to translate our commitments with concrete action. And definitely, we look up to the Pan-African Parliament as the chair of the AGA to drive the AGA process forward and make sure that we realize some palatable results across the continent. But we agree with most of the honourable members that PAP can also do this more effectively if PAP is granted full legislative powers. I'll leave that to Excellency the Vice President. Burkina Faso, I agree with you, and your question, it's an important one, honourable member, of whether the early warning system in Africa is working. How effective is it? Excellencies, you'll recall that we have the African architecture, the African peace and security architecture, with 5 main pillars. One of those pillars is the continental early warning system. I must admit, Excellencies, here before you, Mr. President, that the continental early warning system is doing its best to ensure that we are able to get early warning, early signs of crisis. We ensure early response for early recovery. But we still need to do much more. We still need to do much more, because prevention is better than cure. So we're trying to assist the continental early warning system to make sure that we also have early analysis of possible crisis situations. That analysis then advising the AU policy organs how to respond early enough. Let me give you a concrete example where I think we can say that there was relative success in terms of early warning early response, early action, early recovery. This, to my mind, Mr. President, is Burkina Faso. And I'm glad that we have honorable members from Burkina Faso here. The crisis in Burkina Faso that was amounting to, actually essentially amounted to unconstitutional change of government, and that was followed by also a military coup. The AU, working together with the ECOWAS and the UN, were able to intervene early enough to ensure that that crisis does not get out of hand, does not escalate into outright war. And Mr. President, fortunately, Burkina Faso is back on track through a very peaceful and democratic election that was held there very recently. So I wanted just to highlight that, Mr. President, in response to Burkina Faso. And in fact, the question was coming from Burkina Faso itself. So the response, actually, my response makes that example of Burkina Faso as a case in point that can be emulated across our continent in terms of early response. Guinea, yes, these are very important questions that Guinea has raised, and a number of other members of Parliament have raised them. This relates to the problem of entrenching, or rather the challenge of entrenching constitutionalism and rule of law on our continent. That we still face challenges presently of constitutions being amended arbitrarily without consulting people in most instances for prolongation of tenure of sitting presidents. Is a fact and is a problem. Now, the charter, the African charter, and by the way, before I go to the African charter, Guinea makes the point that this problem is also generating conflicts on our continent, and is a fact. And with those conflicts, we are not able to have peace, we're not able to have democracy, we're not able to have socio-economic development. It's a fact. In the charter, the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, Excellencies, Article 10 specifies clearly how a constitution can be amended constitutionally. How a constitution can be amended democratically without trampling on the rights of the people. It's very clear. But Article 23 also stipulates how a constitution can be, how amendment of a constitution can be considered as tantamount to unconstitutional change. So the charter provides what to do to amend your constitution constitutionally, and what not to do, not to fall into the trap of unconstitutional change. So the charter is very clear. But some countries follow the charter in amending their constitutions, but others have contravened the charter in a number of ways. And this is a problem that I think PAP also needs to come to the party. We address this problem together. Presently, we are trying to develop, and we would like to invite PAP to be with us in this. We are trying to develop guidelines. The Peace and Security Council has instructed us as the African Union Commission to develop guidelines of how best to amend constitutions constitutionally without falling into the trap of unconstitutional change. So we invite the PAP, Mr. President, to be with us in that journey through the AGA to develop that framework for our AU member states. Tanzania, Mr. President, I think Tanzania raised issues, the same issue that we raised, which I think would also I would also like the vice president to handle the issue of PAP promoting the African agenda without full legislative powers. I would love to just defer that for the vice president to tackle, because we agree in principle. And then Parliament without full powers simply becomes a talking shop, and I think we need to address that. And therefore, that as PAP chairs the African governance architecture and its platform, PAP would be in a position again to promote the idea, or even advocate for the full ratification of the new PAP protocol, and we will be in support of that as the African Union Commission, in supporting PAP to achieve that vision. It would be very historic actually if we could have simultaneously. And this also addresses the question from Sierra Leone. If we could have simultaneously universal ratification of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, and if we could have universal ratification of the new PAP protocol. That would be very historic. And if we could aim at that, that would be a very important milestone and achievement by the African governance platform under PAP's chairmanship. I think I've tackled the issue by Ethiopia, the second intervention by Ethiopia, to some extent on the institutions and leadership. I think the only issue there that's remaining is the idea that now that the PAP is the chair of the AGA and its platform, we need to take advantage of the PAP's political clout and political leverage to ensure that we push for universal ratification of some of these key AU shared values instruments. But to do that, we need an action plan. That's what Ethiopia is saying, and I agree with that. We need to have clear standards for doing that, action plans and clear targets, monitoring and evaluation of how we're achieving the plans. And I think that can be done under the PAP's leadership. Guinea, Mr. President, we need to, PAP needs to play its rightful role to hold leaders to account. That's what PAP is about. I agree with Guinea. That's what PAP is about. PAP needs to ensure that it has the power, the adequate power, effective power to hold leaders to account. And Guinea then goes forward to pose the question about the relationship between the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, and I think, if I'm correct, you meant the African Court on Human and People's Rights. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights is based in Banjul. The African Court on Human and People's Rights is based in Arusha. Now, the two play complementary roles, not really duplicative roles, complementary roles, in that the Banjul Commission deals with complaints and also assesses state of human rights on our continent. But the court in Arusha deals with cases, legal cases that are brought before it by member states as well as citizens of countries that have ratified the protocol establishing the court. So it may not be useful to aim at to think of merging them. There's no case, I think, for duplication here. There's no case for resources being misused. I think it's better if they're two together like this, but emphasizing more coordination and cooperation between the two institutions. Sierra Leone, again, I think on the issue of colonialism and independence, very good question, very good issues that you've raised, important issues that you've raised, reminding us of Nkrumah, of seek ye first the political kingdom, and all else shall be added unto you. A very powerful statement that we have to attain political independence, but that's not enough. Other things have to come with political independence. But let's accept the reality. And I think Sierra Leone has a point here. Let's accept the reality. Most of our countries have managed to achieve the political kingdom, but all else has not yet come. For example, we do not as yet have economic independence as African countries in most instances. Much as we have political independence, our economies are still dominated by multinational corporations that siphon resources out of the continent to enrich the West, while Africa remains underdeveloped. So that's the fact. And these are the issues that, in fact, the Mbeki panel raises poignantly. Mbeki panel deals with illicit financial outflows out of the continent. That report by President Mbeki, tells us that every year the continent loses, or rather bleeds profusely, bleeds resources out of the continent to Europe, to the magnitude of 50 to 60 million, is it million or even billion? Billion actually. 50 to 60 billion per annum, per year. And you can imagine. Now, besides the illicit financial outflows, Excellencies, you have now learned in the past month or so of the Panama Papers, where now these corporations also siphon resources out of the continent to tax havens in Panama and other places. This is how the continent is losing. This is how the continent is losing its resources and remains underdeveloped. And it then takes us to a paradox that one of the members raised. Why this continent is rich in resources, yet it is the poorest on earth. Only last week we had a retreat of the Executive Council, honorable members, Mr. President, in Nairobi. And this was the issue that was tabled. The issue discussed by ministers of foreign ministers in Nairobi was, why is it that Africa is rich, but its people are the poorest on earth? Yes, it's a paradox. So some of the issues that were raised were, one, yes, illicit financial flows, corruption, right? Issues of financial flows, illicit financial outflows, corruption, weak institutions, weak negotiation of contracts by our governments, contract negotiations, and also the issue of our economy still being controlled by external actors rather than our own private sectors within Africa itself. So these are some of the issues that were raised in that meeting, Mr. President, in Nairobi last week. Now, Burundi, I think these were largely comments, and I think I agree with Burundi on the issue of the media, bringing the media to play its rightful role within the AGA platform and also within governance arrangements at national level, because as you rightly point out, Burundi, the media has a big role to play in promoting democratic and participatory governance as the fourth estate. The right to information, I agree with you 100%. Mali captures the point, I think, that we've also been making over and over again, Mr. President, that the problem that we have in advancing democratic governance on the continent, even through the AU, is that we are good in terms of putting in place normative frameworks, protocols, declarations, charters, that also get signed, ratified, but we are poor when it comes to implementation of these shared values instruments. So that PAP, therefore, is called upon to see how we can bridge that gap between norm setting and norm implementation, PAP itself as being the true representative of the people. Sudan, on the ensure participation of all political parties. Sudan was raising the issue that if AGA is to be successful, we also need to, at national level, to ensure that all political parties participate in the political process. It's a fact. The political system should not be left solely to the as the preserve of the ruling party. All parties have to participate during elections and in between elections. It's a fact. So that should be the motto and the principle, and also the issue of youth risking their lives through the Mediterranean Sea, trying to go explore, greener pastures in Europe is the problem that we all need to address, and we can address that if the democratic system it's working on the continent, and youth and women are able to participate effectively. That can be addressed so that our people don't risk their lives through the Mediterranean Sea. And we prioritize the livelihoods of our people. Liberia, 100% I agree that we still have a problem on our continent in terms of managing diversity. Constructive management of diversity is a problem. We still have problems where we still, within our countries, look at each other through lenses that are divisive, not unifying. Ethnic lenses, religious lenses, color, racial lenses, right? So regional lenses, gender lenses, generational lenses. So we have to bridge all these cleavages. We have to bridge the gap that is brought by the fault lines of diversity through ethnicity, tribalism, religion, region, race, etc., etc. And he gave a good example of the just elected mayor of London, who is a Muslim himself, but who was not elected on that card. So I think we can do better on this, and I think a number of countries are already beginning to establish what we call cohesion, national cohesion commissions, such as Kenya. It has a national cohesion commission. Other countries are establishing different kinds of mechanisms, such as in this country you have what we call Chapter 9 institutions. In this country, South Africa, Chapter 9 institutions that aim to also bridge that gap and make sure that diversity is managed constructively. In Egypt, Mr. President, yes, the level of development also does have impact on our democratic advancement. So we need to, as we pursue democratic governance, we also need to pursue simultaneously socio-economic development. We also need to pursue building peace and stability on our continent. And in terms of pursuing socio-economic development, Africa has to prioritize addressing basic human rights of our people. And we can do that, and starting with this year being the year of human rights, to address the basic needs of our people, namely food, shelter, health, education, clothing, environmental protection, security, without necessarily undermining the other rights, civil liberties and political rights. But for Africa, we need to give more accent to addressing development, rights that speak to socio-economic development of our people. And the Sierra Leone, I think I've addressed the question of ACDEC not yet been fully ratified, and the PAP protocol not yet been fully ratified. And I agree with you 100% that we need to prioritize these two instruments in order to champion governance on the African continent. The Vice President raised an issue also of leaders adhering to constitutions and respecting the term limits as defined within the Constitution, rather than arbitrarily amending the constitutions to prolong tenure. This is a big issue that I think we need to work together with PAP to address. And Peace and Security Council is also grappling with this problem that is facing us. Sudan, I agree on the issue of our understanding of the concept of governance. For me, Mr. President, the concept of governance can be defined simply to mean state-society relations. How the state relates to its citizens, and how the state exercises its power over citizens, and how citizens in turn holds the state to account. That's simple as that. How the state interacts with citizens and how citizens hold the state to account. And the state having the responsibility to provide services to societies, to citizens. And that for me that's the basic definition that I can provide to Your Excellencies for us to move forward on the concept. Tunisia, I agree. I think those were comments. I agree with Tunisia 100%. And Tunisia also raised the question of the paradox of rich Africa and poor Africans. I've addressed that earlier on. And I agree with Tunisia on the issue of women's empowerment that Tunisia raised. And I will add youth empowerment as well, gender equality and youth empowerment. These are very important ingredients of promoting democratic governance on our continent. And if they are not addressed, then we have not yet done our homework in terms of ensuring that democratic governance is entrenched and consolidated on our continent. In fact, let's not forget that women constitute more than 50% of all our populations, of the 54 countries. The populations, women constitute more than 50%. Youth constitute more than 70%. So it is important that they are brought into the mainstream of governance processes, and they are well represented in Parliament and other decision-making structures, women and youth, and also not forgetting other marginalized groups such as people with disabilities and minorities. So we would like to call on honourable members to ensure that we advance that agenda. Finally, Mr. President, is the issue raised by Togo on the external interference, and I think other honourable members have addressed the issue actually. External interference, foreign interests, and how this then also affects our efforts in promoting democratic and participatory governance on our continent. Yes, we need to ensure that Africa promotes democratic and participatory governance that speaks to its own context, to its own socio-economic and political context. Democratic governance cannot be imposed, Excellencies, from outside. Governance or democracy cannot be imported and exported as if they are bananas, oranges, or apples. They have to grow within a particular context, African context, and they have to be aligned to the particular situation of Africa. That is why it is important, therefore, that Africa determines its own governance systems based on the ideology of Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance. And this is where the Pan-African Parliament then comes in to play a key role as the chair of the African governance architecture and its platform. Thank you, Mr. President. I thank you, sir.
Thank you. To response.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to thank my colleagues for such a passionate debate. I can understand the passion, and I can also sense a sense of disappointment, a sense of also displeasure, especially when it comes to the position of PAP vis-à-vis the African Union. We still continue to be an advisory body, and that is actually affecting the extent to which we can carry out our legislative functions of lawmaking, of oversight, and also representation of the African peoples. So I can understand. I want to thank my colleagues. Dr. Matlosa has really taken his time to explain most of the issues, to clarify most of the issues raised. So for some of those issues, I will only speak to them if I have additional information to give. On the issue of the continental free trade, the continental integration, I think the information I want to give here is that in January this year, during the Heads of State Summit in Ethiopia, the meetings of the ministers of foreign affairs and also the meeting of the ambassadors, especially in the retreat in Makele, the issue was extensively dealt with. Already, we have some countries, like if you take the ECOWAS region, wherein no ECOWAS member needs visa to enter another ECOWAS country before you leave your country. You are given a visa to stay for 90 days, after which, if you want to extend your stay, you can do it. We know that Rwanda has now also waived any prior visa application. You get to Rwanda, then at the port of entry, you have your visa. So that was a big concern. And at the end of the day, it was the decision, and that decision was acclaimed and was passed unanimously, that all countries should at least give visas on entry for 30 days, or even more, depending on the wishes of the country. That, however, did not take away from the countries the right to do due diligence. Because in as much as we want to give visas on entry, we also have to make sure that we protect our country from terrorist movements, from people that would come with ulterior motive. So I think the next sitting will be this June, and I think in Rwanda, I'm sure there is going to be a report by the different countries with regards to the extent to which, for those countries that don't already have this rule, this policy, to report on whether they have now accepted that. So I think that is going to help in the movement of people especially. The issue of the executive and the judiciary, that the presentation did not dwell much on the executive and the judiciary. I think what we have done in the clusters, knowing that good governance, the tenets of good governance are free, periodic, fair elections, constitutionalism, rule of law, an independent judiciary, free press, and all of those things. The clusters have been organized along those tenets of democracy that we all know. So maybe Dr. McCloser didn't have time to read the clusters. What the clusters are: one, we have the cluster on democracy, and that cluster is dealing with elections, with parliaments, with political parties, and also non-state actors and the media. That is what the cluster on democracy is dealing with. The cluster on governance is dealing with public service and administration. That is, the executive is dealing with the local governance and decentralization. It's also dealing with accountability and anti-corruption. And in fact, if you go to also the Charter on the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Good Governance, all of these clusters have chapters and articles. In fact, it is from there that these clusters were, because it is one of the most important African share value documents, which we are struggling to grapple with, even though it has now come into effect, into force. We know that only 25 countries have signed. But these clusters have been carved out of the African Charter on Democracy and Good Governance. We have the Human Rights and Transitional Justice Cluster, which deals with the norms and standards of human rights. And it also deals with redress mechanisms, such as the TRC. In Sierra Leone, we had to set up the special court. In Rwanda, they had to set up the Gacaca court alongside the major court itself. Then we are dealing with constitutionalism and the rule of law. Under that, we look at rejecting unconstitutional changes of government, which you find in Chapter 8 of the ACDEC. And then also, we deal with the executive, legislation, and judiciary systems. And then lastly, we are dealing with humanitarian assistance. That cluster will deal with free movement of people, refugees, and protection of civilians. So when you look at the mandate of each of these 5 clusters, although there are overlaps, but they clearly also address the salient issues in the African Charter on Democracy and Good Governance. The issue of PAP, whether PAP is known in all our countries, this is not a new question. This is also a burning issue. This has been a recurrent issue that has been debated here in PAP, has been debated in the different advocacy missions that have been discussed, and presentations have been made. Yes, we agree that PAP is not as well known as it should be. But even the parent body, the African Union, is not as well known as it's supposed to be. So I think in this parliament, we have had several debates and we have come up with several strategies how we make the PAP known. Because even when you come in, sometimes you present your Pan-African Parliament diplomatic passport. Sometimes, depending on who you meet, you can wait until they clarify some issues. So I think we have a roadmap for improving on the visibility of the PAP. We know that the speakers and the Secretary Generals of Parliament meet here every year in August. And one of the issues that have been the agenda item has been the visibility of PAP. How do we make PAP visible in our respective countries? The speakers and the Secretary Generals have agreed in their communique that every parliament will set up a PAP desk with a liaison. That PAP desk is going to be the liaison between the national parliament through their 5 delegates that comes here with the Pan-African Parliament. The PAP desk will be the one every year to ensure that there is a plan of action of rolling out PAP to the peoples of that country. And we have set a deadline that August this year would be the deadline in which every Speaker of Parliament and the Deputy Clerk and their clerks will send to us here before the next meeting of the clerks. We send to us here the name of the focal point and the modalities they have put in place to establish the PAP desk. For example, one of the work of the PAP desk will be every year there is going to be a PAP day. On that PAP day, there is going to be interaction between PAP and the citizens of that country, where they come to Parliament, questions are asked, presentations are made. Just like, for us, the Commonwealth countries, we used to have a Commonwealth Day, wherein, we have matches, there are speeches, there are statements, to improve on our knowledge on the Commonwealth. So it's going to also be like that. And other countries, some parliaments have already established their PAP desks. They have a plan of action, and some have even gone further to have a budget line. Like Sierra Leone, we now have an office, a PAP desk. We have a budget. This year we presented a small budget line to the Minister of Finance, and we have given that money, and we are going to use that money to roll out PAP. So these are just some, but at the end of the day, let me tell you, my colleagues, if we expect that the Ministers of Foreign Affairs and the Ministers of the Attorney General, Minister of Attorney General Justice, and even our heads of state, who have already adopted the protocol, revised protocol, if we expect that they are going to be the one that will voluntarily take the initiative to bring our policy, our protocol to Parliament, forget it. It is our responsibility. We should be knocking at the doors of the ministers, inviting them to Parliament under question time to tell us the status of the ratification of this protocol. Because you know that, first of all, it goes to in some countries, it goes to the 2 ministries for convergence. Once the 2 ministries have looked at the protocol and they see that there's nothing in the protocol that is going to affect the sovereignty of that country, then they send it to Cabinet. Cabinet takes it to Parliament. In Sierra Leone, what we did was we knocked on their door every day. In fact, inviting the heads of state here was a bet to ensure that if Mr. President will invite you as guest of honor, you should come here with a certificate of ratification to say, look here, colleague heads of state, if Sierra Leone we have done it, you could do it. And that was how we speedily had to ratify, because our president had to come here and we made it very clear that we want to put Sierra Leone on the map. So he should, together, all of us, will do everything to make sure that the protocol is ratified. So I think it is going to be our own project, the project of the delegation of the Pan-African Parliament, to go back to our countries and engage the radio, engage the media, engage the Parliament, but consistently knock on those ministers that are responsible. We are also lucky that Honorable Aissata Kabia was in charge in her new role for ratification. So that is how she, again, every day followed up on where the process was. So I think it has to be our own responsibility in addition to the responsibility of the heads of state. If they didn't want us to become a legislative body, then why spend so much time and money in Malabo to debate it? Why have we sent every time our president, our vice president are in Malabo using taxpayers' fund to pressurize, to clarify issues that comes from the PRC for it? So if they have now seen that it is time we have the legislative function, they should also have the moral responsibility to move from the adoption to the operationalization. But as I said, sometimes it may not be in their interest. So it is us, the members of parliament, that have to make sure that it is done. Strong institutions and not strong leaders. I disagree. With all due respect to our learned brother Obama, I disagree. Who makes strong institutions? Strong leaders. If you have a strong, visionary, forward-looking leader, that leader will transform the institutions to make them strong. Even if you have a strong institution, but if you have a very weak and less visionary leader, that leader can destroy that strong institution. So it's an issue of the chicken and the egg. Which one comes before each other? So institutions don't come from the sky and fall in countries. It is individuals that work to transform ideals into tangible realities, ideas of good governance, ideas of accountability, your idea to provide for your people, your idea to have a zero tolerance to corruption. It is these ideals that has transformed into structural framework to give us these strong institutions. So while I agree that Africa needs strong institutions, Africa needs strong leaders to create those institutions or to sustain those institutions. When leaders come, they should continue on where subsequent leaders have left. But if you have a weak leader, when they come, they will dismantle all the strong institutions because maybe they don't want to acknowledge the good work of their predecessors. So both are important. We need strong leaders who will make strong institutions, but we also need strong leaders to sustain those strong institutions. That is what I have to say. I just want to say to my sister from Conakry that, yes, we have leaders in Africa that have judiciously held on to the Constitution. You mentioned Benin, Seychelles. Please, don't leave Sierra Leone out. Sierra Leone, we have maintained our 2 terms. There was a smooth takeover from the Tijan Kaba government to the Ernest Bai Koroma government. And we hope that there will also be smooth transition from the Ernest Bai Koroma government to whoever will take over in 2018 after our elections. So please, we want to be in history. The media, we were told that what is the role of the media? I've already said that among the clusters, the media is key on the first cluster, democracy, and that means the media. But also, if we look in our ACT deck here, the role of the media is also very clear. If you take chapter 2, paragraph 10 of the media, paragraph 10, it says clearly that promote the establishment of the necessary conditions to foster citizen participation, transparency, access to information, freedom of the press, and accountability of the management of public affairs. So the media is key in any democratic institutions because the media would educate, inform, but also call both parties to account. So it's very important that we have a free media. At the same time, while also calling on the media to adhere to the code of practice. We have seen also how media in our countries have sent out hate messages. The issue of Rwanda, a particular media, was very instrumental in the genocide, and we have also seen it in other countries. So while the media is important in democratic institutions, they must also be responsible and have an obligation to ensure that by what they send out, they don't burn the country. The issue of what is the relationship between AGA and the other organs? The platform is made up of all the AU organs, but it's also made up of the RECs. In fact, the COMESA is the vice president of the AGA platform, in addition to all the other organs. So there is a good relationship because we are talking of the African, the political architecture, and without all the platforms coming to it, then it will become a problem. So there is a very good relationship between us, the platform. And then the corruption, the issue of corruption was introduced. Again, as you had, under the governance cluster, anti-corruption and accountability is key here. And it's also very, very key also in the ACDEC, because corruption is one that is sipping our resources away. So it is an important issue and it's also part of the cluster. But let me say that also in our countries, most of us have an anti-corruption act. In fact, some have revised it, like Sierra Leone, to add money laundering and terrorist financing, because it's very important. Most of the corruption also takes place when money is being laundered. So it's important that we take it on board. It was a pity that our colleague who moved the second motion here could not continue with the motion. Because the issue of our natural resources, because I'm addressing it because somebody alluded to the interconnectivity between our natural resources and corruption. Our natural resources are very rich, but I agree, one way we are going to ensure that it benefits us is through beneficiation. That is, we must process our natural resources, even if not to the final product, but to the semi-product for us to be able to export it. Because in the beneficiation process, we create more jobs. You create the need for other complementary institutions to provide other services to the beneficiation project. But what we have also learned is that most times we give concession for a single mineral to an industry. But, for example, if you take bauxite, bauxite does not, it's not found alone. Bauxite is found in composition with other minerals. But most of the time, it is the main mineral that is the form or the major source of the contract. But when we export the raw materials, what happens to the other minerals that are found in those raw materials? They may be of very good value and also highly, with high value. What happens? Report is only made to us on that mineral for which the contract is. Report is not made to us for the other minerals. So in the process, we lose double because we don't get the royalties, neither do we get the correct profit on those other minerals that are not part of. So that is why beneficiation is very good. There is a lot of corruption also in the mineral sector. We have seen this. When Thabo Mbeki dealt with illicit flows, we know exactly how some of these illicit flows are done. So we must address ourselves as Parliament and as Africans. What mechanisms we put in place to ensure that we benefit from it? Of course, corruption is going to be one. But also, we must ensure that we have trained, skilled manpower to ensure that we put them in some of these institutions. Otherwise, what we are seeing is that when we sign these contracts, majority of the companies are bringing in not only skilled labor, but sometimes even semi-skilled labor. And sometimes, if we are not very discerning, they even bring in the local non-skilled labor. So that is why it's important that we make sure that we tie these things together. I think I cannot agree more with the suggestion that we have a workshop on the African Union organ for members of this parliament. Mr. President, just this session, if I'm not mistaken, we have sworn in maybe 50 members or more. These new members may need this workshop and also us as a refresher, because there may be new things that would have happened in the African Union that even us, the current existing members, do not know. So that our members know exactly what are the organs, what are the structures. With that information, we are in a better position to raise up motions in this parliament to address the gaps that would have come out of this workshop. So I agree that, Mr. President, this workshop is imperative, and the sooner we can organize it with the African Union, the better, so that we know exactly what are the roles of each of the organs in the African Union. Lastly, but not the least, I cannot agree more with the role of women in all of what we are saying, and there are good examples on the continent. For example, there's nothing wrong if we call on the Tunisian government to talk to us about the good success stories of the women's rights or the role of women in their government. Rwanda, of course, has every now and again taken the platform to tell us how after the war they have been able to turn around Rwanda. But that turnaround has come because first, in their constitution, they have been able to recognize that everybody has the right to enjoy the country of Rwanda, that including women. And they have taken particular measures in the constitution to affirm all the laws, the treaties affecting women, but to move further to give special preferences to women. Today, if Rwanda has over 60-something%, it's not a magic. It has come with political will. Conscious effort, never again to go back to the dark days of the Rwanda genocide, which both men and women suffered. They have taken this, they have set up institutions to look after the reconciliation. They have put institutions to ensure that every commitment made by the government is followed to the letter to see that it is implemented. So I think, honorable members, I stop here. I want to thank you for listening, but I want to stress this, that in as much as the heads of state have adopted our protocol, let us not sit and wait for them. Let us take the proactive measure to call upon them and all those in our government that have the responsibility of moving our protocol from where it is now to from where we want to be. The 5 members from each of these countries will have a particular responsibility to ensure that we do everything through the normal tools we have in Parliament, either in our committees or in the well of Parliament, to question our ministers as to what programs do they have to bring not only this protocol, but a lot of other protocols that we have not signed. The African Charter on the courts is still to be signed and ratified by a lot of people, lot of countries. Every time we meet, there is the advocacy from the president of that court that the court will suffer if we don't ratify. So I want to thank you all, and I hope that
Merci beaucoup, Madame
we'll
la
take it
Présidente.
further from here. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. and I submit the report and the presentation of the role of the Pan-African Parliament and the African Governance Architectural Platform. There are no observations, no comments, and it is passed. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, honourable members, I would like to invite the members requiring diplomatic passports to go to the room that has been allocated and to do